I want to talk about adjustments, and this is our adjustments panel right here, right above the layers panel. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a copy of the background by pressing Control J. And we may not make any changes that would affect the background, but in case we need to, I always like to have an extra layer so that I leave the background layer untouched in case I don't like the changes. The adjustments, there are a lot of different adjustments. We can adjust the brightness and contrast, and you see that it creates a new layer when you click on it um, that affects everything below it, but it doesn't affect anything above it. So then this dialog box comes out, and we can make the image brighter, we can ramp up the contrast, things like that. If we want to accept the changes, we just click this to get rid of that dialog box. If we want to revisit this, we're going to double click inside there, and we can change it back. Or if we want to get rid of it, we just click on that delete button. It's going to ask us if we're sure we want to delete that layer. We're going to say yes. The levels adjust the darks, the lights, and the midtones. So by pulling this way, I can make the darks even darker. I can make the midtones brighter, and I can make the lights brighter. This is something that you just will want to experiment with, play around with. You can also just grab the layer and pull it down to the trash can if you don't want to keep it. The curves are kind of complicated, but it's important to learn how to use these. As you get over to this end of the line, we're talking about the brights in the picture. As you get down to this bottom end of the line, we're talking about the darks in the picture. So if I want to make the darks even darker, I'm going to click on it and I'm going to pull down. Now let's say I wanted to make the brights even brighter. I click on it and pull up. You can also make adjustments, make curve adjustments to the reds, the greens, and the blues where it isolates those colors. So we can pull the reds down out of the highlights but leave them essentially the same in the darks and midtones. And there are different applications for this, especially when you get into photography. For our purposes, it's probably just better for you to understand and experiment with what happens when you adjust the curves in regular RGB mode. Exposure is also really helpful when working with photography. You can basically lighten or darken your picture if you've got a picture. And I think that this picture is a little bit low light. I think that it needs to be brightened a little bit. And you can experiment with the offset and the gamma correction as well. We're not going to go into detail about what these are right now. All right. Here's where we can adjust the vibrance and saturation. Really increase the saturation of the picture. There's another place that I usually use. There's another adjustment that I usually use to adjust the saturation though. And that's right here in the hue and saturation. I actually use this tool quite a bit. You can totally desaturate the picture or really saturate it. Another thing that I like, and you can also adjust the lightness and darkness of the image. But one thing that I use this for a lot is to colorize things. If I want to make something be a certain color, if I want to change the color of it, I use this tool a lot in order to colorize things. There are a couple other tools that are going to be pretty useful to you that you'll use pretty often. Some of them you won't use that often. You can see here you can adjust the cyans, magentas, yellows, reds, greens, and blues. You might not use that as often unless you're doing photography stuff. Now, the invert tool is going to change all of the colors to their opposite, which is kind of a cool thing to do in certain cases, but in some cases like this one, it just looks weird. But this tool is one that you're going to use quite often, the threshold tool. It basically takes your image and makes it into a black and white image. And you can adjust it with this slider right here until you get it where you want it. And for the purposes of this, I just want the darks to kind of show me where the dark places are on the wolf. And in our next lesson about using the pen tool, I'll show you why. But you should experiment with all of these adjustments and see what you can do with them, because you can really do some cool stuff with them. But usually if you don't have a good reason to use the adjustment tools, if you're not careful with it, you can end up making something just look a little bit ridiculous.